Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, not 2 seconds before we hit record, you said something very uncharitable to me about the general boldness of my predictions. And it reminded me, I have a plan for some of our upcoming shows where I have games I want to play, inspired by another podcast I listen to, where they will just sort of spring a game on their co-hosts. I can't wait. It just reminded me, like every once in a while I'll have an idea and I'm like, that's too mean. I forgot. Like, nope, now you've inspired me. So now, dear friends in the audience, you have that to look forward to on future episodes.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. I have some names of some old-timey Ohio State players here, and I need you to give me the ears now. I'll save that for another day. Tom, speaking of upcoming episodes, Thursday on the internet, you and me, 1000th episode of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, 1000 episodes. That comes out to 400 million minutes. Did you know that?
I got to tell you, it feels like more than that. It feels like we should be around 12 to 1500 right now. When you think back to how long we've been doing this, I think we started, the first one we did was at the Cotton Bowl in 2017. That was the first time you and I did a podcast together. A lot of things have changed since then, but yes, many podcasts have happened. You're welcome / we're sorry.
So that'll probably be a live show some point on Thursday, which would be a great time now to go ahead and hit the bell to be notified if you're watching this on YouTube, and you'll be given a heads up that we're going live. But I'll also put something out on social media, of course, as we all always do. Tom, we're continuing our spring positional previews, but first we should talk a little bit about a new hire for the Ohio State football personnel department in Sam Petito, who comes over from Alabama. Their director of player personnel at Alabama now becomes OSU's director of player personnel, will work under Mark Pantoni side by side, essentially Pantoni, the general manager of Ohio State football, which is now, that was the position title he got a year or two ago, just because of the way things are now, the portal and NIL and everything. It's no longer just director of recruiting. That is insulting now to call a general manager that. So now you're bringing in another guy. I've gotten some really good reviews from him. Families like him, players like him. So to me, like, he's coming from Alabama. They've done okay in the recruiting game. He has contacts everywhere. He is basically another Mark Pantoni. And so now you have just doubled up that portion of the connections, the ability to relate and just get along well. I was told, like, he's a tremendous salesman without coming across like a salesman, which is probably maybe the best kind of salesman. But he's worked at Georgia and been at Alabama for, I don't know, like 7 years or something. So he's been around some big time programs, will come to Ohio State and fill a vacancy that was there. I don't know how long he's going to be around, because my question with him is, does he want to go ahead and run his own program again, run his own department again? But pretty big hire that you may not hear about necessarily, but one that will pay off down the road in recruiting and transfer portal, because all of these guys that you're recruiting in high school, they'll still be in your phone when they're in the portal, you know?
Yeah, this is one of the, changing Mark Pantoni's job description or job title from director of recruiting to general manager is reflective of the fact that, if you're the baseball team's general manager, you're not just doing the amateur draft, you're also doing free agency, you're also doing, managing your current roster. You're probably, in baseball, implementing some of the, top down kind of organizational philosophies, all that kind of stuff. The job of the player personnel director / general manager has changed so much over the last couple of years, in terms of all of a sudden, everyone who goes in the portal, they're looking at a whole lot of those guys. Because, yeah, sometimes it's Caleb Downs and you go, yeah, sure, that's an easy one. Sometimes it's Will Kazmarek who's playing tight end in the MAC. And is this someone who's worth, who we think is worth bringing in? And that takes some film study. That probably takes, you're making some phone calls. You're making, you're checking, hey, is this a good kid? Is this a bad kid? Is this someone who works hard? Is this someone who is not going to be able to keep up with things at Ohio State? All that kind of stuff. There's just so many more demands on that position that bringing in another person there, that seems like a no-brainer. And I think it just seems reflective of a couple different realities of the sport right now, maybe three different realities of the sport. One is there's a lot more that goes into those jobs right now than there used to be. So you need more people, more experienced people. Number two, you are continuing to see the differentiation between the programs at the very top and the programs that are maybe a little further down the ladder in terms of the resources that they can throw at the problems that are reflective of the modern realities of the sport. And three is Alabama minus Nick Saban might not look like Alabama for, in ways, in a number of different ways. We'll see what that program looks like, what that roster looks like. And this is not the first thing and the first time this has happened to Alabama. Scott Cochran, who was their strength coach, left for Georgia several years ago. He just left Georgia, I believe, this offseason. So, this is not the first time anyone has ever left Alabama by any means, but, someone leaving Alabama to go to Ohio State, that is, if I was a Crimson Tide fan, I'd be a little concerned about that.
Yeah, the program is completely different, and the colors are the same, but inside you've got a new staff, new players, obviously, and it's reading something with Caleb Downs, and I think his family talking about this is no longer Nick Saban's Alabama, so it's somebody else's program entirely. It's not the program that we chose, and so you go and look and see. I saw some Alabama fans on Twitter over the last few days saying, we better keep Sam Petito as long as we don't lose him. So it gives you an idea of what Ohio State is getting there with that. And the transfer portal, and you talk about the scouting. Ohio State has a full-time college scout on staff, and Billy Homer, who looks at a lot of the transfer portal stuff. I remember a few years back, that was also one of the things Pantoni was doing. Like, there's only so many hours in a day for one guy, and these departments have grown and grown and grown. And these guys now are making more than head coaches used to not too long ago, and probably more than some head coaches, certainly a bunch of head coaches in the FCS level. So an interesting addition for Ohio State, one that you should just be aware of and watch how that pays off down the road. Tom, let's start with the defensive ends. We're going to preview the defensive line today. And it's neither room is overly deep, but they have roughly the numbers that Ryan Day wants. But this spring, when you look at defensive end with, we'll just run through them quickly, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, Mitchell Melton, Joshua Mickens, Edric Houston, the true freshman. That is 7 names. Ryan Day wants and Larry Johnson want 8 defensive ends and 8 defensive tackles. They may have 8 this summer, depending on what position Dominic Kirks plays. Probably going to come in and maybe start out at defensive end, but grow into a tackle so they can maybe get away with it a little bit. But they're also deep enough right now that it won't matter. But I don't expect much from JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. I'm not going to break any news on that one this spring. They're going to be doing minimal amount of work. So to me, this is a huge opportunity for not just Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, but Mitchell Melton to get more action. And Joshua Mickens and Edric Houston. Obviously, this is Houston's first spring. This is Joshua Mickens' first spring. He enrolled last year in June. So we didn't really get to see almost any of him last year. So I'm looking forward to watching those two to see just how well they fit in and how much they look like Ohio State defensive ends are supposed to look. But with the overall lack of depth and the 2 seniors probably not doing much this spring, is this depth, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing for the Buckeyes this spring?
I think that's a good thing. I don't think you need that many guys. I think the depth is fine for this fall. So therefore, having a little, having a couple guys you're sort of pushing off to the side in JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, that just gives all the other guys who are in various stages of their development, that just gives them more reps this spring, more opportunities to work with Larry Johnson and work with the coaching staff and work on the field and get reps in practice and get reps in scrimmages. I think that's a positive, because if you're not worried about the depth for the fall, then your depth isn't a problem. It's not like they're going to be desperately short of defensive linemen to run a defensive line drill or anything like that. You've got walk-ons there too if you need to help fill out a drill somewhere. And this is a big spring for some of those younger guys to, they're all in sort of different stages. But Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, we have seen a decent amount from them. They've sort of worked their way into a rotation last year. This is a big spring for them to earn, maybe they earn more playing time this fall. Maybe they, certainly that would be the hope. Some of the younger guys, it's a chance for them to maybe show that maybe they can be rotational players this year or get closer to being rotational players. And then Mitchell Melton, well, you're running out of time to, have a regular spot in that rotation, or, we'll talk about the jack in a little bit. Is that a jack thing? Whatever. This is all opportunities for these guys to really show that they deserve a bigger role and put themselves in a position to take on a bigger role this fall.
It is interesting that you're exactly right. This is a huge opportunity, but Mitchell Melton, Joshua Mickens, Edric Houston are looking, and the top 4 defensive ends, I think, are completely set at Ohio State. And I don't know how much further they'll get into that rotation this season, but you would hope that the desire to, even if the playing time does not look like it's available, as we keep talking about, it's a long season, and they are going to have to rotate as many guys as possible. So even though it looks like an insurmountable depth chart, they have ways of getting people on the field. And we've talked before about how in 2017, like the first 4 or 5 games of the year, Chase Young had more snaps than anybody else on at defensive end as a true freshman, because there were a bunch of blowouts. They rotated, they got guys in, and that was the most loaded defensive end room you're ever going to see. And they still found time for Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper. One of the interesting aspects for the defensive end specifically is the hire of Brandon Jordan, who comes from the Seattle Seahawks, a pass rush teacher, technique specialist, was with Michigan State before that as a well-known pass rush teacher, probably not unlike LaCharles Bentley with the offensive line, where he's just a private businessman doing the coaching, and you have quarterback gurus who do the same. Basically, Jordan is a pass rush guru. So I did see when this hire was announced last week or a week or so ago, we haven't really gotten a chance to talk about it, but it was described as when Jordan went from Michigan State to Seattle, it was described as Michigan State losing their best recruiter on staff as well. And this is the guy who, I think when the news broke, he was viewed as the eventual replacement for Larry Johnson. Not sure that's the case, but it'll be interesting to see what his impact is this spring on those pass rushers.
Well, if you look at the pass rush numbers, and it really, let's boil that down more to the sack numbers, they have not had the Chase Young level sack numbers the last few years. And, the numbers last year were better than the year before, but there have been several years where the leading sacker on Ohio State's team has like 4 or 5 sacks. If you can get those production numbers up a little bit this year, number one, that's going to help your defense. Number two, that's going to help your defensive line on the whole, and your defensive linemen in terms of their NFL draft stock. You've got JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, both of whom could have gone into the draft last year. If they come back, their numbers improve, and they are in a position to have their draft stock improve, well, guess what? That probably makes it more likely that someone else down the line sticks around and chooses to stay for another year and benefits you down the line. And it, is kind of doing right by your players as well. If the deal is you're going to come and get developed for another year, for another year with some additional insight from someone else. Because I'm going to guess they've heard most of what Larry Johnson has to say at this point. They have heard, they've probably gotten, Larry Johnson has shared all of the wisdom of his experience with them over the last few years. Now this is an opportunity to sort of supplement that and bring in a couple, pair of fresh eyes and some different perspective and maybe some different drills or different techniques or whatever it is. This feels like this is a very low stakes move for Ohio State. This is not one of their 10 countable assistants.
Mm.
So if he does end up being the ultimate replacement for Larry Johnson, great. They were looking at doing some kind of move there. We've talked about the fact that Jason Taylor, the defensive line coach for Miami, was a possibility in terms of being that 10th assistant and being sort of a defensive line coach in waiting. Whether this is a defensive line coach in waiting move or not, this is a move that helps supplement that room, helps this year's players, and potentially helps provide some more long-term stability in that room down the line.
It also requires the scheme to let the pass rushers rush the passer rather than just occupy, and they want to keep things under control. But sometimes Jim Knowles has talked about he likes a little bit of, wants guys to be a little out of control, be a little reckless, but they've got to marry what they want to do with what they can do, and it doesn't always equate to sacks. You mentioned the leading sacker, Jack Sawyer's 4.5 sacks in the regular season in 2022 were the most by an Ohio State defensive end in the regular season since Chase Young had 16.5 in 2019. And Sawyer had 6.5 this year, but 3 of those came in three of those came in the Cotton Bowl. So we've seen glimpses, and perhaps, again, I still think it's a lot of just letting them do that. And with the back end that you have, maybe you can be a little bit more aggressive up front. I'm interested to see how that goes, but we won't know that this spring. That's something for the Oregon game. Maybe is that finally when we'll know for sure if they're going to unleash these guys. So as I mentioned, this is going to be the first spring that we see Joshua Mickens and Edric Houston. What are we expecting there? Because this is going to be a learning experience for Houston, but sometimes it's fun to watch these freshmen who are supremely talented show that. And they're going to be going through a bunch of offensive tackles at Ohio State. We'll see how those competitions go, and we get to see some one-on-ones or some two-on-twos, things like that. For Mickens, I think both of these guys will probably see an opportunity to play regardless of the depth chart, because as we said, a bunch of guys have to play. But it wouldn't surprise me if Mickens is the guy that, Ohio State thinks he is. He's like 150th ranked player in 2023 in the class. Now would be a good time for him to show some of that. He got here in June last year. You're not really expecting anything. And you don't even necessarily need anything from him this year, but anything I think you get from those two guys, that's just a bonus.
Oh, it's absolutely a bonus. And I think there's an interesting question to be had. If Joshua Mickens and Edric Houston look dominant during scrimmages or during the spring game, is that a good thing or a bad thing for Ohio State? And I think that's a very complicated question, and I'm not sure I know the answer, because it feels like defensive end is not a position where Ohio State needs those young guys to be really stepping up and providing incredible depth, because they have 4 guys at least ahead of them who they're feeling pretty good about. I think offensive line and tackle especially is a spot where if you're having tackle issues this spring, that's probably not a great thing. So we'll see how that shakes out over the course of the spring. But, Mickens and Houston, this is a really optimistic time, I think, for both of them, because they both have an opportunity to have a significant impact this spring and to get a lot of reps this spring. But there's not a ton of pressure on them where it's, boy, they really need this young guy to take a huge step forward. This is a great opportunity for both of them in their first springs to really take that big step, to take that leap. But if only one of them does, or, both of them are just kind of improved but not immediately ready for the field, that's not a disaster. There is going to be opportunity this fall with the top 4 guys that we've talked about, and the fact that you're going to be playing a lot of, the Akron game. You would like to see Josh Mickens and Edric Houston get 15, 20 snaps in the Akron game, in the second half of that game, because you don't want your starters out there. You don't want your your twos out there necessarily, even for, the second half of the third quarter and the fourth quarter. So, there are going to be opportunities for those guys to get on the field and show what they can do. If they have just solid springs, I think that sets them up for really promising falls.
The last question I have for you on the defensive ends is, will we see the jack? Now, we did not see it in the spring last year. It was still talked about. We didn't really see it in 2022 in the spring either, as I recall. It was something that they were going to add in later on. Now I think they have everything they have all of the experience they could want. They could throw it in and go with it this spring and get a good look at it. Do we want to do it? Do we want to bring it back? When we talked to James Laurinaitis last week or the week before, he said they still have it. You can still see it. This is such a veteran team with so many different pieces. I think you could see it this spring. I'm not ready to say you will. I won't be surprised to see it, but based on the fact that they didn't do it, should we draw a conclusion from the fact that they didn't do it in either of the two previous springs that I recall? I know we didn't see it last year. I don't believe we saw it in 2022, even though we talked a bunch about it. Should we not expect it this spring since we haven't seen it? Or is this I believe this is a much different defense, so maybe we will, but are you expecting it?
I think I'm at the point with the jack position where I'm not even going to think about it until we actually see it. I'm not going to believe the talk about it this year. And, we'll see 3 weeks from now, I'll probably be talking about it on a podcast. But, until I see it, I kind of need to see it because we've been talking about it for so long. And in 2022, we didn't see a whole lot of it because they had to really get the base hit defense installed first. And then 2023, Mitchell Melton was still coming back from the knee injury that he suffered in the spring game the year before. So we didn't see it last spring, and then we didn't see it last fall much. At some point, I kind of have to see it before I really am going to get all worked up about it again. You have the guys. We've talked about, Mitchell Melton was the guy who they were sort of talking about as this is the guy who's going to be the jack in 2023. And, you have guys like CJ Hicks, for example, who I think might be a really good, interesting fit there. But I kind of got to see it. I would like to see it before we treat it yes, this is definitely going to be, at some point, I'm going to stop sitting out in the field and waiting for the great pumpkin to come. I'm going to need to see, I'm going to need to see it before I'm yes, finally, this is the year. But maybe.
And maybe that also depends on what Sonny Styles agrees to do. Does he move to linebacker? And now it's we're still going to get some CJ Hicks some reps there, but while we're doing that, in order to get him more reps in practice, why don't we also throw the jack in here in the last, 6 practices or whatever? But in order to not upset you any more time, we'll move on. We won't talk about it any further until next time. So let's move to the defensive tackles, where I'll run through the names here. Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, Hero Canoe, Caden McDonald, Jason Moore, Tywone Malone, Will Smith Jr., and true freshman Eric Mensah. So that is that's the 8 that they want, and it's versatile. It's a veteran, sort of. Tywone Malone comes in as a senior, but would you consider him a veteran? I mean, he's been around 2 different programs, didn't play too much last year. For me, if this is very similar to the defensive ends, I don't expect Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams to be doing much this spring. They don't need to. They'll do their coaching thing. But in terms of who needs the biggest spring out of everybody else, like I said, Tywone Malone is now in his last go-round because he doesn't have a COVID year. He was a 2021 guy. So this is it for him, and he played enough games last year. Hero Canoe and Caden McDonald started to come on at the end of last year to the point where they both look like, to me, they will be involved this season. We haven't seen anything from Jason Moore as a true freshman last year. We're really expecting it. He's still growing into a defensive tackle. He has a big defensive end, and he's a big kid. I think he arrived at like 6'6", 285 or something like that. So, he's got that promise. Will Smith I believe he was injured a bit in the spring last year, so we didn't really get to see him. And then, of course, out for the season. Not sure what to expect from Eric Mensah as a 3-4 defensive end in high school, what he will be, how long will it take him. I'm expecting when we watch warm-ups, he's going to be the last scholarship player in line, which is typical of freshmen in the spring. We'll see if he can move up from there. But of all those names, Tom, if you're asking me who needs the biggest spring, I think it might be Tuimoloau, just because of you don't want to be passed by some younger guys. And as a senior now, you've transferred to Ohio State to play. I remember talking to Larry Johnson at the bowl game a year ago or whatever it was, maybe it was pre-spring, where it was communicated like, well, Tuimoloau's more of a 2024 guy for them than a 2023 guy. Well, we're here now.
Yeah, we are here now, and I'm right there with you. This feels like, with a Hero Canoe, with a Caden McDonald, it felt like, okay, these are guys who are relatively young. Canoe last year was in his second year, McDonald in his first year, and they were both really pushing for playing time. Last year was Malone's third year, and he was kind of in the same group as those guys in terms of where he was in the depth chart, and you really didn't see a ton of him in the first halves of games. And this is your last go round, so you need to be earning a spot in that rotation. And much like we talked about with the other guys at the defensive end position, if the guys ahead of you are probably watching a lot because they're in that 2,000 rep club or whatever the Ryan Day equivalent of the 2,000 rep club is, this is your chance. This is your opportunity to go out there and show what you can do and earn that spot in the rotation and earn a chance to really be playing significant first half minutes. And I'm super interested to see what he can do this spring, because he was a very, very talented prospect coming out of high school, went down to Ole Miss, split time between baseball and football, and it just never really made a real impact in either one. It's hard to do two different things and be able to keep up with people who are just doing one thing, and they're doing it at a very high level. Because at this, at the SEC level, at the Big Ten level, everyone was an incredible high school player. You're surrounded by people who are also athletic freaks. And I think missing time for baseball probably hurt him a little bit in terms of his football development. So now he had a year playing full-time football at Ohio State. Let's see what it looks like going into that fourth and final year for him, because it is kind of now or never for him. It feels like, based on the athleticism, based on all the projection that we have seen with him over the years, the talent is there. It's just now that he's had a full year of just football, can he really put it together this spring? This feels like unquestionably it's the biggest spring for him, kind of a, make or break spring for him.
And I may be wrong about this. I don't think I am. This may be his first spring practice as a football player because of the baseball. He transferred to Ohio State last June, or last May. So I don't know if how much spring they get, with the baseball, but certainly it'll be his first spring go round with Ohio State. You look at the Cotton Bowl, for instance, the snaps, 9 snaps for Hero Canoe, 4 snaps for Caden McDonald, 2 snaps for Tuimoloau. Now, Caden McDonald played a lot. When he was in there, it was the short yardage stuff. So when I look at those 3 guys, because those are the 3 guys that are next up. Hero Canoe played the 4th most snaps last year behind Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton. The lowest of those was like 343 by, I think, Ty Hamilton. Hero Canoe was at 90, just to give you an idea of how far off that drop was from 3 to 4. That needs to be a lot closer this year. I think it will be. That's also up to Larry Johnson, but it's also up to the guys to be able to be called upon. I think they finished well. I'm expecting a big spring from Canoe, from McDonald. In terms of the 2 deep, to me, we're putting Tyleik Williams at 3 tech again, Ty Hamilton at nose. Hero Canoe was a 3 tech last year when I go back and watch, and, Caden McDonald at nose. Taiwan Malone a 3 tech as well. Like, that's, I think, going to be a battle all year long between Malone and Canoe. And right now, I don't know that Hero Canoe isn't ahead of him. So there's, Canoe needs to stay ahead of him if he wants to play as much, but also Taiwan Malone needs to kick it into gear, because you never want to be passed by a younger guy, especially in your last year. And they do need another 3 tech to step up, because I don't think you can't play a season again like they did last year with 3 defensive tackles. That's all you really have when you're playing 16 games. And we see that you would wear down late, and you'd wear down late in the season. They can't allow that to happen this year.
No, they can't allow that to happen. And they were fortunate because those guys stayed pretty healthy last year. The year before, Mike Hall missed a ton of time. He was more or less healthy, I think, most of last year. To play with 3 inside guys on your defensive line, taking the vast majority of your snaps, that requires a lot of luck. And even when you're lucky, relatively lucky health-wise, that still is not a great thing. So you do need some of those guys to step up. And I think what's interesting about the 3 guys we were talking about here in terms of Malone and Canoe and McDonald. We already talked about Malone and sort of a wonky development path for him because he played baseball. Hero Canoe got a very late start playing football because he was from Germany, and then came over and played a little bit of high school football in California before he came to Ohio State. But, he's still relatively new to the sport, and Caden McDonald was a true freshman last year. So I think there is still a lot of growth potential there with those 3 guys. But yeah, they definitely need at least 2 of those guys to really step up this year.
And this will be hopefully our first good look at Will Smith Jr. as well. And I know a lot of people will swear by him as well. So, Tom, anything else before we get out of here? No, I think we're good. Okay. Thanks for, I'm not even going to let you answer.
No, I think we've hit it. I mean, it's just a very interesting room, because there's a lot of talent on the younger guys. The guys we're not really talking about, Jason Moore, Will Smith,
Yeah.
totally unproven, even though they've been here a year. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to watch there. Eric Mensa behind them, obviously, as well. But yeah, this is a very similar, I think, to the defensive ends, where you've got the 2 guys who you feel very good about, and you're pretty comfortable about heading into the spring. You've got that next group of guys who are maybe ready to take that next step, and this could be a really big spring for them. And then you've got the kind of unproven guys behind them, and we'll see where it goes from there. But it's an intriguing position group for sure.
Yeah. And Jason Moore, another guy who got here in June. So he was also a step behind, and now he'll be playing plenty this spring as another guy who could contend as that 3 tech. But of course, Larry Johnson's going to cross train, and for the last couple of years, like, why is Mike Hall a nose tackle? Why isn't he a 3 tech? He seems to be more suited. So, we can say this guy's this guy, and this guy's that way, that guy, that position. And Larry Johnson will come out and say, not so fast, my friend. Actually, he's this, because he's the coach. But, so that will do it for us. Again, go ahead and hit the bell to be notified when we drop more videos. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the thumbs up to like this one as well, if you would. We'd appreciate that. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you're not yet subscribed to BuckeyeHuddle.com, please do that as well. It is a great way to support what we do, and also a fantastic way to keep up to date on what is going on with the Ohio State Buckeyes. And of course, every day, Tom, got Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning on YouTube and, of course, your podcast platform of choice. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.